Hello and welcome to the Tank Club. We're on the PTS for the Scribes of Fate update 37, and there is some absolutely huge changes coming along for tanks for this patch. So many things in terms of quality of life and improvements for tanking, and for the most part a lot of it is positive. So we're going to dive in right now and go over all the changes that are going to be happening for tanks with this patch. So one of the first major things that is going to change for this patch is now, when blocking and bar swapping, you will no longer drop block for that time in between the bar swap. So currently on the live server, when you are holding block and you try to bar swap to your back bar while continuing to block, it will automatically drop your block. As you can see by the block icon on the screen, when you hold block and you switch bar, that never goes away. So you maintain permanent blocking even while bar swapping. So this is like a huge change where often people will get caught during a mid block change to the back bar when they're doing a bar swap. They'll get caught out, and this has been removed. So now you can just continue to block when you're switching bar, and this is going to prevent a lot of deaths, but mainly for those newer players that maybe don't know that it drops block. So this is really useful. The next big change revolves around taunt immunity. Currently in the game, when you taunt an enemy and then maybe you cast your taunt a second time, you build up 2 stacks of taunt. When a second person comes along and hits it with a third taunt within a short space of time, this creates the enemy getting taunt immunity, which means they cannot be taunted again for a period of time. Now what's changing with this patch is they are making it much more difficult to create taunt immunity. So now it's going to take 5 stacks of taunt, and each player can only stack taunt 1 time. So apparently being able to stack 2 stacks of taunt at a time was a bug. So this has been changed now. So if you taunt the enemy and then somebody else then taunts the enemy, you can then taunt it back and we won't create any taunt immunity. In fact, you could switch the boss up to 5 times between 2 people before taunt immunity is reached, and that's all within a space of 12 seconds when that initial taunt is first cast. So you've got to cast 5 taunts between 2 people within 12 seconds to create taunt immunity now, which is going to make this very difficult to actually get it. And the reason why this is so important is because on console, and people who don't use add-ons will probably know very little about taunt immunity. It's not something that you can see or track in game. You have to use add-ons to track this, and then it can be, you can create taunt immunity on an enemy quite easily. The fact that this is being made difficult to reach now, like you are not able to get those 2 stacks as an individual without switching taunt multiple times between multiple people, it's going to make taunt immunity very difficult to achieve. So this is a great thing again for those situations. If you want to stand there spamming taunt on the enemy and then somebody else comes along and taunts it off you, you'll then be able to taunt it straight away and get it back again, because you won't be able to create that double stack of taunt on your own. Great change to make massive improvements to how tanking functions, especially in trial content where you have more than 1 tank. Another absolutely huge change is soft taunts returning to the game. So just over a year ago we had the soft taunt removed from the game, and what that is it's called the fiery grip taunt. And what this did was, when you used a chain ability such as unrelenting grip on the Dragon Knight, or when you used silver leash on every other class, when you use those skills, it would apply a short taunt. Now this got removed from the game because there was a bug created with taunt. So it was kind of interfering with how taunt functions. So you would find that people trying to apply taunt to an enemy didn't work, and there was a few different issues regarding taunt. So what they did was, rather than try to fix it, they just removed it from the game. And at the time, it was a very irritating situation, because back then we would use chains to actually taunt enemies like in short bursts. So when you were trying to taunt things in ad pulls and when you were trying to pull enemies in, it would allow you this short space of time where you had taunt and those enemies wouldn't run off, they wouldn't attack group members, and then the removal of that made it much more difficult at that period of time to try and get control of enemies and tank things without them causing damage to your group. What they've done now is they've added this soft taunt feature back into the game, but they've improved it and they've worked on it, they've developed it, and they've fixed it. So now, let's just look at Silver Leash for as an example. You will deal physical damage. You'll taunt an enemy for 15 seconds if they are not already taunted, and reduce their movement speed. So you're going to pull the enemies and you're going to taunt them. And the good thing is this doesn't interfere with the current taunt. So if we look at this now, If I taunt this enemy with a chain, so you can see there it's got the taunt, the 12 seconds, 11 seconds, it's counting down. So we've actually taunted this enemy with the chain. Now, it doesn't interfere with the current taunt, so if we try to chain it and taunt again, it doesn't refresh that taunt, look. So we can keep casting it and it doesn't interfere with that taunt. If we pierce armor this enemy, so we've got taunt applied to this enemy, when we try to chain it, it doesn't interfere with the taunt. So when an enemy is taunted, you will be able to chain it and not taunt it. But when the enemy doesn't have a taunt applied to it and you chain it, you'll get a 15-second taunt now. So this is much, much better than the old soft taunt, because the old soft taunt was only 5 seconds. This is a full 15-second taunt, which makes it absolutely fantastic. And this is going to apply to a wide range of things. So it applies to Unrelenting Grip, it applies to Silver Leash. It also applies to Beckoning Armor. So as you can see here, while active, enemies that strike you with a range attack will be pulled towards you once every 2 seconds and become taunted for 15 seconds if they are not already taunted. So very, very strong addition to a lot of ranged pulling abilities. Now, this also applies to Swarm Mother monster set. They didn't mention anything about the Warden portals, so I'm going to say that that's not the case. A particular update for the Necro tank includes the Death Gleaning passive. This has been increased to 666 Magicka and Stamina restored. So whenever an enemy you are in combat with dies within 28 meters of you, restore 666 Magicka and Stamina. An improvement to the Necro tank sustain. Currently it's 200, so obviously when you go into those combat situations with multiple enemies and they're dying around within that 28 meters, then you are going to get a lot more resources back. There's been a huge change to Elemental Blockade. This implicates virtually all tanks, because we have been trying to teach people for a number of years now to use the Elemental Blockade combination with Pulsar. And what that used to do was Elemental Blockade would go down on the ground, the enemies would be on top of that, you would cast Pulsar, which makes the chilled effect proc, and then the Elemental Blockade would immobilize the enemies. What this allowed us to do was to give an immobilization skill to every single class, no matter what. So the Necro, the Nightblade, the Templar, everyone had a reliable, easy method of creating that crowd control effect. Now, what they've done is they have actually removed the immobilization from Elemental Blockade. So while the other things are great improvements, for me this is a bit of a nerf, because we are now losing the option of being able to crowd control enemies on both the Nightblade and the Templar tanks especially. The Sorcerer and the Necro don't have really good, reliable AoE surrounding your character as a kind of immobilization. On a Warden and a Dragon Knight, there's no problem. You can switch it around and you can use Choking Talons and Gripping Shards, so they are fine. It's the other classes that are going to suffer here. So the Nightblade, for example, doesn't have a skill that can immobilize, but it does have a fear. But if you chain an enemy in and then try to fear it, it doesn't work. So this is a real bit of a nerf, to be honest, for quite a lot of tanks. What you are getting in return is Blockade of Frost. Costs more, but snares and reduces armor against chilled enemies and grants damage shields. So, as you can see here, I've got a couple of enemies. When we cast Blockade, it's now going to apply Minor Breach to these enemies, but the enemies have to be chilled for it to work. So you can see the chilled proc there. The chilled proc happens. You can see the little circle there. That is the Minor Breach. So it's a very, very unreliable source of AoE Minor Breach. Now, unless you're using something like Pulsar to go alongside it to guarantee that proc, then it's not really much of a benefit, because you now get in this situation where you've got AoE Minor Breach, but you've got to use 2 skills to activate it. So we've lost some abilities to gain certain things. If you were using this against the boss, obviously you might be using Clench, which is going to give you guaranteed chilled effect. And if you've got Blockade and chilled effect, you've got a guaranteed Minor Breach, as long as you're keeping up your Frost Clench. So it's not quite as reliable as using Pierce Armor, in the sense that you get a 15-second Minor Breach with the Pierce Armor. With this case, you've got to have both the chilled effect active and your Blockade, and you've got to keep proccing the chilled effect to maintain that Minor Breach. So at least now we are getting some benefits and utility to potentially, if you're running a double Frost Staff build, for example, you've got easy access to Minor Breach without using a certain enchant, the Absorb Stamina enchant, you're going to be able to obtain that in a slightly easier way. But in terms of like general tanking, this feels more like a nerf because we lose the immobilization. We lose that utility for the sake of gaining something else. The snare from this ability isn't exactly strong enough to replace an immobilization because it's a 40% snare. Caltrops gives us a 50% snare, and we did test this out, and stacking Caltrops with blockade, the two snares combined do not stack. So it's not like we can replace the loss of an immobilization by stacking up Caltrops on top of blockade and getting a 90% snare. That just doesn't work. You just get one snare out of the two. Whichever way you kind of look at it, we've got that problem there where we do have a bit of an issue. Obviously gaining the snare and the minor breach is a nice addition, but it's at the same time you're losing that immobilization. It's causing us a bit of a problem. It does mean we're going to have to change the way that we play again, and it is going to mean a lot of changes to most of the Tank Club builds. The next change is the Harmony Jewelry trait. Now this again, a big change. It's a potential game changer in the sense of if you're in combat situations where you're using quite a few synergies, each piece of Harmony Jewelry is going to restore 880 health, magicka, and stamina. So with 3 Harmony, you're going to gain 2,640 resources back from each synergy. You've also got to take into consideration you'll also proc the Undaunted command passive when doing so you're also going to get the stats from that. And obviously if you're using a shard or an orb, you'll also get the resources back from that. Now if we think about a typical group, you're potentially going to have like 2 synergies, let's say from a bog standard group, and you can cast them on cooldown every 20 seconds. So with just 2 synergies in a group on cooldown every 20 seconds, we're going to benefit from 5,280 health, magic, and stamina. That's every 20 seconds if you were getting 2 synergies on cooldown. Now when we consider something like the Necromancer tank, as a Necro you can provide your own synergy. So when we think about it now, so we're able to perma-block by, even when bar swapping, we'll maintain block. We're able to gain an insane amount of resources. The Necromancer tank has become way more beginner friendly with this Harmony change because now we can use our own synergies. So if I just go into combat here, let's drop some resources down. So if we then go into combat, we use the synergy. Huge amount of resources. If we also cast another skill, huge amounts of resources. If we are a Necro with Avid Boneyard, we use our own synergy, huge amount of resources. And every 20 seconds we can do this. So that's 3 synergies that I'm obtaining here on my own. So 2 from my actual character and 1 from the action arc itself. So this is kind of opening up the opportunity now to gain absolutely huge amounts of resources back from the Harmony trait. Now when we consider how much benefit do we get from infused magicka recovery, so how much magicka recovery are we benefiting every 20 seconds, how much are we benefiting from infused cost reduction by using the infused trait. So we're still able to benefit from magicka recovery. I can still use 3 pieces of magicka recovery, I could still use 3 cost reduction, but using Harmony instead of infused, we're going to have to look at some more detailed numbers on what the benefit is of using those, because this is just absolutely insane. Like if you're using a lot of synergies, like it's going to be a problem if you've got an Alkosh user in your group. But let's take a trial situation. If you've got 5 synergies going off every 20 seconds, you could just stand there and perma-block the entire trial and just spam synergies, and you're going to gain so much resources back no matter what class you're on, that you're going to just be able to maintain your block permanently and virtually never run out of resources. What this also means is you wouldn't need to worry about things like bracing or sturdy or anything really resource wise, because Harmony would just be constantly delivering all those resources. Now obviously the situation is, if you are in a group where there's no synergies, this is a complete waste of a trait. So you do have to kind of think about, okay, if you're in a group and there's nothing in terms of a synergy, then this is going to be completely 100% inactive. If you're in any kind of group that provides any kind of synergy, you're going to be benefiting from huge gains in resources. And it just means that it potentially is a massive game changer, especially for new players who aren't confident with dropping their block and playing more aggressively, and you'll have no excuse really for hammering out all your skills and your buffs and debuffs because you'll have so much sustain coming in from Harmony if you've got a lot of group synergies. So this is a huge change, potential game changer in a lot of situations. I'm not really sure if this will stay as this value, because I think 880 seems like a lot. And like I say, the amount of resources you're able to obtain, depending on the situation and the synergies, is absolutely humongous. A couple more small changes now. So one, Crimson Oath's Rive. While you are in combat, so they've changed this now so you can't accidentally proc it outside of combat. So if I stand here next to these enemies, it's not proccing it, whereas if I'm in combat, it is proccing it. So a nice change really. It's going to prevent people from accidentally pulling enemies. Really, really good update. There's a small change to the Arch Druid monster set as well. This has changed in terms of the distance that it hits. So it's now 6 enemies within a 7 by 5 meter line on your target. It's no longer a cone, it's like a line instead. So it's not going to miss its target as often now, because it's going to hit a much wider radius. Another one for tanks is the Pearls of Elnathay. When attempting to use resources to cast a healing ability while in combat on your dominant resources under 50%, you gain 3 ultimate. They've upped this from 30 to 50%, and what this will do is allow more people to make use of it, because it can be quite tricky to knock your resources down to 30% and then cast healing skills to gain the ultimate, whereas at 50% there's a bit of a higher success chance with using something like this, so it should open the opportunity for more people to start using this particular mythic item for ultimate gain. This isn't really a change to tanking, but they've changed Elusive Mist now. Currently it's completely inactive for PvE, it's useless, but it's going to get an adjustment now, so it's going to become more of a gap closer, and you're going to take 3 projectiles are going to deal no damage for 1 second while you're dashing forward with this, and you're also going to get Major Expedition and Major Evasion after using it. So obviously this isn't something I'm going to say is like really necessarily for tanks, but there are certain situations where as a tank you do have to move across the room. So I'm thinking Dread Celery first boss, Halls of Fabrication triplets, situations where the tanks have to move quickly across the room to the other side. If you are somebody who struggles with that particular situation, maybe you take too much damage on your way across, maybe you don't do it fast enough, you've now got the option of Elusive Mist to quickly teleport across the room. So if we look at how it functions, you just cast the ability and you just move across. So wherever you point in your cursor, it can travel up to 15 meters. If you only put it a short distance, it will only go a short distance, and you can't spam this ability because the faster you cast it, the more expensive it's going to be. So you can kind of put it ahead and move across the room. So when I'm saying getting across the room to an enemy in a certain trial situation, you might be able to do so, and that makes it just that little bit easier potentially for those exact situations. Another huge change comes along with the Sorcerer tank. So the Sorcerer tank is now going to benefit from the damage shield. This is going to scale with max health. So as you can see here, I've not even optimized my build, I've just thrown some gear on and I've put my attribute points in. I'm going to get a 15k shield now, because this is going to stack either with max health or magicka. So absolutely huge damage shield for the Sorcerer tank. If you use regenerative ward, you're also going to provide a group buff, so you're going to get minor intellect and minor endurance for yourself and your group, as well as gain a 15k damage shield. So now this is actually a very useful Sorcerer tank skill, because it provides both a benefit for you and it's a group buff. So fantastic update for this. Massive, massive damage shield. We've also got a really big change to the Warden tank, and Crystallized Shield is changing. So you're going to get a damage shield as per usual. With the unmorphed version, each time you absorb a projectile you gain 2 ultimate. Now when we try to morph this, we've got Crystallized Stab. So we get now the shield size goes to the current on live server shield size. So this deals damage and you get a bigger shield, the same as what the current shield is on the live server. Now if you take the Shimmering Shield morph, which is typically the one that most people use for a tank, you're going to get a much smaller shield. So as you can see, Crystallized Stab is a 65,828 damage shield from 3 projectiles. Shimmering Shield is only 43,885. The benefit of using Shimmering Shield is you're going to get, each time you absorb a projectile you gain 2 ultimate, and you gain Major Heroism. So you're getting the ulti-gen benefits by using the Shimmering Shield morph. This is basically the ultimate version. And if you want the bigger shield like the current live server version, the much bigger shield, then you have to go with a Crystallized Slab version now. So It's a change. It's not really a huge nerf in a sense that you're still able to obtain the big shield if you want it, but if you're comfortable taking a smaller shield with the benefit of gaining more ultimate, then obviously you would take that option. So a couple of changes there regarding the Warden tank shield as well. Finally, we got the gear and we've got the new monster sets. So this first monster set, it gives stam recovery, mag recovery, health recovery. Each second you're in combat, you gain a stack of Dark Light up to 30 stacks max. Each stack increases your recoveries by 8. Each time you're out of combat, you lose a stack. Doesn't really seem that useful to me because in terms of sustain sets, you would actually probably be better off having something more consistent, such as a one-piece choke thorn with a one-piece shadow rend if you wanted to stack up your recoveries, because magicka recovery is typically your main focus. Stamina recovery, only useful if you're not blocking. Health recovery, not really very impactful. So if you wanted to guarantee some kind of recovery, using those two one pieces would be more beneficial. The 5-piece heavy set from Bal Sunar, so you get magicka, stamina and health. While bracing increases your magicka recovery by 369, and while you are not bracing, increases your stamina recovery by 369. Again, it goes back to that situation, like a 5-piece set just to benefit your own sustain. While it might be useful for some players, it's not as if you can use this to start farming your other gear. You might as well just go and farm your other gear and use crafted gear rather than going away and farming this. Again, I do think you'd just be better off using two one pieces of a monster set if you needed to gain that sort of mag recovery. And then if you're using Harmony Jewelry, this completely outweighs the use of a set like this that's going to give you a burst of resources rather than switching up your recovery. Also, if you wanted to benefit from that kind of recovery, you could just use a mythic item. As you can see here, it's very kind of similar to the Torque. While your stamina is less than 50%, increase your mag recovery, and while your magicka is less than 50%, increase your stam recovery. Yes, you don't have, it's about blocking and not blocking on that set, but it's like achieving a similar thing, but this is a one piece of gear, and that's a 5-piece of gear. So I don't see the point in wearing a 5-piece of gear to achieve a similar effect that you could just get from slotting a one-piece mythic item. In the other dungeon, we've got another monster set. This one is related to healing. It's not really going to be used for a tank. On the 5-piece set, again, we've got max stamina, max health, max health. While you're bracing, you and group members within 12 meters of you gain minor evasion, reducing damage from area attacks by 10%. Minor evasion isn't a huge buff to your group. I could see some really minor potential use for this. If you're in an AoE damage situation, you want something that's a guaranteed 100%, then obviously this is going to be kind of useful because it's all you've got to do is block and it's there. Other sets that deal some format of group damage reduction aren't as reliable as this. You can just block and it's there the entire time that you need it. So it's kind of good in that sense, but I just can't see a reason to go away and farm this intentionally because it's just not that useful. Okay guys, that is everything relating to tanks for update 37. Make sure you keep an eye on the Tank Club website, Discord and YouTube for all the latest PTS information. We're going to be doing a lot more testing over the next couple of weeks, and obviously there'll be some tweaks and adjustments I imagine along the way as well, so we'll keep you posted on all of those. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you soon. Bye bye for now.